Babe Ruth was afraid of nothing. He was not afraid of fastballs. He stood at the plate and dared pitchers to throw their hardest, and when they did, he hit the ball over the fence. He was not afraid of breaking records. He broke his own single-season home run record 3 times. Babe Ruth feared nothing and no one. He was the most dominant force the sport had ever seen. And he knew it. He hit 714 career home runs, a record that stood for 39 years. He had a career batting average of .342 and an on-base percentage of .474, the highest in the history of baseball. Ruth feared nobody on the mound, except one. His name was Walter Johnson. They called him the Big Train. He threw a fastball so overpowering that hitters said they could hear it but could not see it. He pitched 21 seasons for the worst team in the American League and won 417 games anyway. He threw 110 shutouts, more than any pitcher in history. In over 100 at-bats against Johnson, Babe Ruth's batting average dropped 50 points below his career mark. His strikeout rate jumped, his home run rate fell. The man who out-homered entire franchises was reduced to something he had never been in his life, a mere mortal. This is the story of the greatest hitter who ever lived and the greatest pitcher who ever lived. The story of 2 men who could not have been more different. Walter Perry Johnson was born on November 6, 1887, on a farm in Allen County, Kansas, the second of 6 children. His parents were farmers who scratched out a living on 160 acres of Kansas dirt. Before he reached his 14th birthday, the family packed up and moved to Orange County, California, hoping for a better life in the oil fields. Walter attended Fullerton High School, where he struck out 27 batters in a 15-inning game against Santa Ana. After graduation, he moved to Weiser, Idaho, where he dug holes for a telephone company by day and pitched for the company's semi-professional baseball team on weekends. He earned $75 a month for both jobs. Word of his talent spread the way things spread in 1907, slowly, through letters, telegrams, and the occasional traveling salesman. A cigar salesman who had seen Johnson pitch sent breathless reports to major league teams. Washington Senators manager Joe Cantillon dispatched an injured catcher named Cliff Blankenship to scout the kid. Blankenship watched Johnson pitch and immediately offered him a contract. Johnson was so reluctant to leave Idaho that he demanded a return train ticket to California in case he did not make good. His parents had to give their permission before he would sign. He was 19 years old, from a tiny town nobody had heard of, and genuinely unsure whether he belonged in the major leagues. He had never been east of Idaho. He belonged. From the moment he threw his first pitch in a Washington uniform, everyone knew something extraordinary had arrived. Detroit pitcher Bill Donovan watched Johnson's debut and said, "That is the best raw pitcher I have ever seen." Johnson threw a fastball that arrived at the plate before hitters could finish their swing. It came from a sidearm delivery, a sweeping motion that generated enormous velocity from an angle that seemed physically impossible. The ball appeared to materialize out of thin air. Right-handed hitters could not pick it up. They would see the ball leave Johnson's hand somewhere near his right hip, and then hear it pop the catcher's mitt before they could react. Left-handed hitters fared slightly better, but not by much. A laboratory in Bridgeport, Connecticut, measured his fastball at 134 feet per second in 1917, roughly 91 miles per hour. That was with the crude measuring technology of the era. Modern analysts believe he threw significantly harder than that, possibly approaching 100 miles per hour with a sidearm angle that made it feel even faster. In addition to his velocity, Johnson had something rarer: pinpoint control. He did not just throw hard, he threw hard to exact locations. He could paint the outside corner at 90+ miles per hour with the precision of a man threading a needle. Hitters knew the fastball was coming. They could not hit it anyway. In his first full season, Johnson posted a 1.88 ERA for a team that finished 49 and 102, 43.5 games out of first place. This would become the defining tragedy of Walter Johnson's career. He was extraordinary, his team was not, and he never once asked to leave. The old joke about Washington went like this: first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League. Johnson heard that joke for 21 years. He never asked for a trade. He never demanded to be sent to a contender. He stayed in Washington and pitched year after year for a franchise that could not support him. In 1913, at the age of 26, Johnson had one of the greatest pitching seasons in the history of baseball. He went 36-7 with a 1.14 ERA and 243 strikeouts in 346 innings. He threw 11 shutouts. He completed 29 of his 36 starts. His wins above replacement of 15.1 is the highest single-season total by a pitcher in modern baseball history. No pitcher has come close. The rest of the Senators were 54 and 57 that season. Walter Johnson essentially carried a losing team to a second-place finish on his back alone. He won 12 20-win seasons in his career, including 10 in a row from 1910 through 1919. He threw 110 shutouts, the most in baseball history by a margin so wide it may as well be a different statistic. The second-place pitcher, Grover Cleveland Alexander, has 90. Johnson has 20 more. Nobody will ever catch him. He won 38 games by a score of 1-0, also a record. He lost 26 games by a score of 1-0, also a record. He lost 65 games in which his team failed to score a single run for him. 65 times, Walter Johnson pitched well enough to win and got nothing in return from his lineup. 65 times he walked off the mound knowing he had done his job, and it had not mattered. On September 4th, 5th, and 7th of 1908, Johnson shut out the New York Highlanders in 3 consecutive starts. 3 games, 3 shutouts, 3 different days. He was 20 years old. Imagine winning 417 games for a team that bad. Imagine how many he would have won pitching for the Yankees. And in the middle of all of it, in 1920, a man arrived in New York who would change baseball forever and test Walter Johnson in a way nobody else ever could. George Herman Ruth was born on February 6, 1895, in Baltimore, Maryland. His parents ran a saloon above the waterfront. He was essentially abandoned by age 7, sent to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reform school run by Catholic monks, where he would spend the next 12 years of his life. A monk named Brother Matthias, a 6'6" giant of a man who could hit a ball farther than anyone young George had ever seen, became his father figure and taught him how to play baseball. Ruth entered the major leagues as a left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox in 1914. He was 19 years old, raw, undisciplined, and gifted beyond anything the sport had ever encountered. He won 89 games with a 2.28 ERA. He threw 29 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in the World Series, a record that stood for 43 years. He led the Red Sox to 3 World Series championships. He could have been a Hall of Fame pitcher and nothing else. Then he became a hitter. And everything changed. In 1919, still a part-time pitcher, Ruth hit 29 home runs, shattering the single-season record. The Red Sox sold him to the New York Yankees for $100,000, the most famous transaction in sports history. In 1920, his first season as a Yankee, Ruth hit 54 home runs. The entire St. Louis Browns hit 37. The entire Philadelphia Athletics hit 44. One man outhomered whole franchises. He hit 59 the next year. He hit 60 in 1927, a record that stood for 34 years. He finished with 714 career home runs, a .342 batting average, and the highest career OPS in baseball history. He ended the dead ball era He replaced Ty Cobb's game of bunts and singles and stolen bases with a game of power and violence, and 50,000 fans screaming as the ball disappeared over the wall. He saved baseball after the Black Sox scandal nearly destroyed public trust in the sport. He built Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built, with nothing but the force of his swing and the magnetism of his personality. He won 7 pennants and 4 World Series championships. Ruth was afraid of nothing on a baseball field. He crowded the plate. He dared pitchers to throw inside. He swung so hard that when he missed, the force of the swing nearly knocked him off his feet. He did not care about strikeouts. He held the career strikeout record for decades. He cared about home runs. He cared about winning. He cared about living as loudly and as recklessly as humanly possible. He stayed out all night, every night. He drank whiskey like it was water. He ate steaks at midnight and hot dogs for breakfast. He chased women across every city in the American League. He broke curfew so often that his managers gave up trying to enforce it. He was brilliant and destructive in equal measure. A man whose appetites were as enormous as his talent. Nobody could humble Babe Ruth. His talent was so enormous and his personality so overwhelming that the rest of baseball existed in his shadow. Pitchers tried everything: fastballs, curveballs, change-ups, knockdown pitches, intentional walks. Nothing worked for long. Ruth adjusted. Ruth adapted. Ruth hit the ball over the fence regardless of what they threw. Then he stepped in against Walter Johnson. And for the first time in his career, Babe Ruth had to work for every base hit. The head-to-head numbers between Ruth and Johnson tell a story that the box scores of other matchups never told. In approximately 113 official at-bats against Johnson, Ruth hit .292 with 8 home runs, 8 doubles, 2 triples, and 25 strikeouts. On the surface, those numbers look impressive. .292 is a good batting average. 8 home runs is a significant total against any single pitcher. Most hitters in the American League would have been thrilled with those numbers against any pitcher, let alone the greatest pitcher who ever lived. But the numbers become far more revealing when you compare them to what Ruth did against everyone else. Ruth's career batting average was .342. Against Johnson, it dropped 50 points to .292. That is not a small gap. 50 points of batting average is the difference between an all-star and a replacement-level player. Ruth's career strikeout rate was 1 punch-out per 6.43 at-bats. Against Johnson, he struck out once every 5.23 at-bats, nearly 20% more often. His career home run rate was 1 homer per 11.76 at-bats. Against Johnson, it dropped to 1 per 14 at-bats, a decline of roughly 16%. In every offensive category that mattered, Walter Johnson reduced Babe Ruth below his career norms. Not by a little, by a lot. The greatest hitter in baseball history became, against Walter Johnson, a merely good hitter. An all-star caliber hitter certainly, but not Babe Ruth. Not the Sultan of SWAT. Not the man who outhomered entire franchises. To put this in perspective, the average American League hitter batted .222 against Johnson over his career. Ruth hitting .292 was still 70 points better than the average. He was still better against Johnson than nearly everyone else. But he was also 50 points worse than he was against every other pitcher he ever faced. Johnson could not stop Ruth entirely. Nobody could, but he could slow him down. He could make him mortal. And against almost nobody else on earth was that ever true. Against Walter Johnson, Babe Ruth was not Babe Ruth. He was just a very good hitter facing a very great pitcher. And in a career where Ruth was never just anything, that was as close to humbled as the greatest player in baseball history ever got. What made the matchup even more extraordinary was what happened when the roles were reversed. Before Ruth became a full-time hitter, he was a pitcher. A great pitcher, and he faced Walter Johnson on the mound 6 times between 1915 and 1917. Ruth won all 6. their first meeting came on August 14, 1915, at Fenway Park. The Boston Sunday Globe placed the game in the center of its front page and called it a game of games. Ruth was 20 years old, a left-handed pitcher who had won 18 games that season. Johnson was 27, already the most feared arm in the American League. Ruth won 5-1, collecting an RBI single to go along with a complete game victory. Then in 1916, Ruth beat Johnson 4 times in a single season, a feat that bordered on absurd. He won 5-1 on April 17th. He won 1-0 on June 1st. He won 1-0 in 13 innings on another occasion, both men throwing complete games in a contest that lasted over 3 hours. He won 2-1 in their 4th meeting. 3 of those 4 games were decided by a single run. 2 of them were 1-0 pitchers' duels, the kind of game where both men matched each other pitch for pitch, inning after inning, and the entire contest was decided by a scratch single, a sacrifice bunt, and a prayer. The 1-0 games were masterpieces of tension. In the June 1st meeting, Ruth retired the Senators with surgical precision, while Johnson was even better, retiring the first 15 Red Sox he faced on just 41 pitches through 5 innings. American League President Ban Johnson attended one of these duels and declared afterward, "That was one of the best ball games I have ever seen." In May of 1917, Ruth beat Johnson 1-0 again at Griffith Stadium, his 6th consecutive victory over the greatest pitcher alive. The announced crowd was 962. 962 people witnessed the 2 greatest pitchers of their era dueling in near silence, the only sounds being the crack of the bat, the pop of the glove, and the occasional murmur from the sparse crowd. Ruth went 6-0 against Johnson before the big train finally beat him with a 6-0 shutout in October of 1917. Johnson held Ruth hitless that day and struck him out twice. The losing streak was over, but the damage to Johnson's pride was done. As a pitcher facing a pitcher, the 22-year-old kid from Baltimore had dominated the greatest arm in baseball history. As a hitter facing a pitcher, Johnson would return the favor, and the rivalry would take on an entirely different dimension. The contrast between the 2 men extended far beyond the field. They were opposites in every conceivable way, as if baseball had produced 2 players specifically designed to be mirror images of each other. Ruth was loud, crude, and reckless. He drank whiskey until he could not stand. He ate steaks and hot dogs until he was sick. He chased women across every city in the American League and made no effort to hide it. He broke curfew so often that his managers stopped trying to enforce it. He was fined thousands of dollars over his career for missing practices, showing up late, and ignoring team rules. He once showed up to the ballpark so hungover that his manager sent him home. The next day, he hit 2 home runs. Johnson was quiet, modest, and disciplined. He never drank a drop of alcohol in his life. He never smoked. He never used profanity, not even in the heat of competition, not even when umpires made calls that cost him games. Shirley Povich, the legendary Washington Post columnist who covered Johnson for decades, wrote that Walter Johnson, more than any other ball player, probably more than any other athlete, professional or amateur, became the symbol of gentlemanly conduct in the heat of battle. They called Johnson Sir Walter and the White Knight. In an era when baseball players brawled in hotel lobbies, drank in speakeasies during Prohibition, and spat tobacco on each other's shoes, Johnson stood apart like a man from a different century. He was polite to opponents who tried to bunt on him. He congratulated hitters who got base hits off his best pitches. He signed autographs for every child who asked. He lived on a farm in Maryland with his wife Hazel and their children, and he spent his off-seasons hunting, fishing, and attending church. And he was terrified of his own fastball. This was the great paradox of Walter Johnson's career. He threw harder than anyone in baseball. His fastball arrived at the plate with a velocity that made grown men flinch and step out of the batter's box. and Walter Johnson lived in constant, gnawing fear that one of those pitches would hit a batter in the head and kill him. He refused to throw inside. He would rather give up a hit, give up a run, give up a game than risk injuring someone. Other pitchers used the inside pitch as a weapon, driving hitters off the plate to set up the outside corner. Johnson could not bring himself to do it. The thought of seriously hurting another human being haunted him. Ty Cobb exploited this mercilessly. Cobb was the most ruthless competitor in baseball history, a man who would use any advantage, ethical or otherwise, to gain an edge. He crowded the plate against Johnson, standing so close that his jersey practically hung over the strike zone, because he knew with absolute certainty that Johnson would never throw at him. Just speed, raw speed, blinding speed, too much speed, Cobb said of Johnson's fastball. But Cobb also knew that the fastest pitcher in baseball would never aim that speed at his body. So Cobb dug in and hit .357 against the big train, bullying the most powerful pitcher alive by exploiting the one weakness that was actually a virtue. Ruth did not exploit Johnson's kindness. That was the difference between Ruth and Cobb. Ruth respected Johnson in a way he respected very few people in baseball or in life. He understood that he was facing the greatest pitcher who had ever lived, a man whose talent matched his own, whose career paralleled his own, and whose place in the sport was every bit as significant as his own. Johnson's career reached its emotional peak in 1924, his 18th season, when the Senators finally assembled a team worthy of their ace. Washington owner Clark Griffith, who had been Johnson's manager during his early years, had spent 2 decades trying to build a winning roster around his star pitcher. Year after year, he failed. Year after year, Johnson pitched brilliantly for teams that could not score runs. In 1924, Griffith finally got it right. The Senators acquired veteran infielders and a reliable bullpen. Johnson, at 36 years old, responded with a season that earned him his second American League MVP award. He went 23-7, leading the league in wins, earned run average, strikeouts, and shutouts. He had planned to retire after the season and become a minor league team owner. Instead, he led the Senators to their first American League pennant in franchise history. The city of Washington went mad. The Senators had been the laughingstock of the American League for 2 decades. Now they were in the World Series, and Walter Johnson, the man who had suffered more than any player in baseball history on behalf of a losing team, was going to pitch on the biggest stage in the sport. The World Series went to 7 games against the New York Giants. Johnson started Game 1 at Yankee Stadium and lost 4-3 in 12 innings. He started Game 5 and lost again, 6-2. His arm was exhausted, his body was breaking down. He had given the Senators everything he had, and it had not been enough. It looked like he would retire without a championship. The greatest pitcher in history denied the one achievement that mattered most. The entire country was pulling for Johnson. He was the most beloved player in baseball, a man who had endured 2 decades of losing with grace and dignity. Sports writers who had covered him for years wrote that it would be a tragedy if Johnson's career ended without a ring. Then, in Game 7, with the score tied 3-3 in the 9th inning, manager Bucky Harris called Johnson out of the bullpen. Johnson was running on fumes. He had pitched in 2 complete games already in the series. He had nothing left except the memory of 417 wins, the desperate hope that his arm would hold together for a few more innings, and the knowledge that this was his last chance. He pitched 4 scoreless innings of relief, 4 innings on an arm that should have been done. The Giants mounted threats. Johnson retired them. They put runners on base. Johnson stranded them. He reached back for every ounce of strength his 36-year-old body had left and found enough. In the bottom of the 12th inning, Earl McNeely hit a grounder toward third base. The ball took a bad hop over Giants' third baseman, Freddie Lindstrom's head, and bounced into left field. Muddy Rule raced home from second base. The Washington Senators were world champions. When the final out was recorded, the stadium erupted. Fans poured onto the field. Grown men wept in the stands at Griffith Stadium, men who had watched Johnson lose for 18 years. Men who had said, "Wait till next year," for 2 decades. Men who had finally seen their hero get the ring he deserved. Johnson stood on the mound with tears rolling down his face. He had waited 18 years for that moment. He had pitched on the worst team in the league for nearly 2 decades, losing 65 games in which his team scored nothing, winning 38 games by a score of 1-0, carrying an entire franchise on his right arm. And finally, at 36, the gentlest man in baseball had his ring. It was the only World Series championship the Washington Senators would ever win. Johnson's career ended in 1927, the same year Ruth hit 60 home runs. Johnson was in the dugout at Yankee Stadium on September 30th when Ruth hit number 60 off Tom Zachary. In the 9th inning, Johnson pinch hit for Zachary in his final major league appearance. He flied out to right field, to Babe Ruth. The last at-bat of Walter Johnson's career ended with a fly ball caught by the man he had spent 20 years trying to get out. They were both in the first class of the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1936, alongside Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner, and Christy Mathewson. 5 men, the 5 greatest players in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. The vote was conducted by the Baseball Writers Association of America, and Cobb received the most votes with 98.2%. Ruth and Wagner tied for second. Johnson received 83.6%. Ruth and Johnson stood together in that inaugural class, the greatest hitter and the greatest pitcher. 2 men who had spent 17 years testing each other across 113 at-bats and 8 pitchers' duels. They represented opposite poles of the sport. Ruth was offense, Johnson was defense. Ruth was the future, Johnson was the past. But they shared one thing. They were both the absolute best at what they did. In 1924, shortly after Johnson's World Series triumph, the 2 legends faced each other in a barnstorming exhibition game in Brea, California. Ruth, who could never resist the chance to swing against elite pitching, hit 2 home runs off Johnson. The second was estimated at 550 feet, a blast that cleared every fence in sight and landed somewhere in the California scrubland. Ruth's team won 12-1. Even in meaningless exhibitions, even in small California towns with no press and no cameras, Ruth could not help himself. He saw Johnson on the mound and he swung for the fences. Their final meeting came on August 23, 1942, at Yankee Stadium. It was a benefit game for Army-Navy relief during World War II. The world was at war. American troops were fighting in North Africa and the Pacific. Baseball was doing its part to raise money for the military, and the biggest draw anyone could think of was putting Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson on the same field one more time. 69,000 fans packed the stadium between games of a doubleheader. Ruth was 47 years old, retired for 7 years, overweight and out of shape. Johnson was 54, his right arm a distant memory of what it had been. Neither man was what he once had been. But 69,000 people came anyway, because some matchups transcend age, transcend statistics, transcend the passage of time. They came to see 2 legends share a field, one last time, in a world that desperately needed heroes. Johnson pitched, Ruth swung. The crowd cheered every pitch and every swing regardless of the result. It did not matter whether Ruth hit the ball or missed it. What mattered was that they were there, together, on the same dirt where they had battled for nearly 2 decades. It was the last time Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson ever faced each other. Walter Johnson died on December 10, 1946, of a brain tumor. He was 59 years old. He had served as manager of the Senators and the Cleveland Indians after his playing career, winning moderately but never matching his pitching dominance in the dugout. He spent his final years on his farm in Maryland, hunting and fishing with the same quiet contentment that had defined his life. The baseball world mourned him with the same understated dignity he had brought to everything. Babe Ruth died on August 16, 1948, of throat cancer. He was 53 years old. Over 100,000 people filed past his casket at Yankee Stadium. 75,000 stood outside St. Patrick's Cathedral during his funeral, listening to the service on loudspeakers in the August heat. The country mourned him like a president, because Babe Ruth had been more famous than most presidents. They died less than 2 years apart, the greatest pitcher and the greatest hitter taken by cancer before they reached old age, leaving behind careers that will never be matched and a rivalry that will never be replicated. Ruth changed baseball forever. He ended the dead ball era. He built a dynasty and a stadium. He became the most famous athlete in the world. He won 7 pennants and 4 World Series championships for the most prestigious franchise in sports. Nobody disputes his greatness. Nobody ever will. But Walter Johnson reminded baseball that the old ways still had teeth, that a sidearm fastball thrown by a gentleman from Kansas could still humble the most dangerous hitter alive, that 417 wins for a franchise that finished last more often than it finished first is as impressive as 60 home runs for a team that won the pennant by 19 games. That discipline and decency and an unwillingness to throw at a man's head can coexist with absolute dominance on the mound. Johnson pitched 21 seasons for the Washington Senators. He never asked for a trade. He never demanded more money than his team could afford. He never complained about the losing, never pointed fingers at teammates who could not hit, never blamed the managers who mishandled his workload. He just showed up every 5 days, threw his sidearm fastball past hitters who could hear it coming but could not see it, and walked off the mound without fanfare, without spectacle, without any of the theatrics that Ruth brought to every moment of his career. Ruth was the storm. Johnson was the stone the storm broke against. Ruth was the headline. Johnson was the quiet truth that made the headline meaningful. Without Johnson and the pitchers like him, Ruth's home runs would have meant nothing. Without a standard to measure against, without a force to resist, power is just noise. Johnson gave Ruth's power meaning by being the one man who could contain it. Ruth hit .292 against Johnson. Against the rest of the American League, he hit .342. That 50-point gap is the story of their rivalry. It is the distance between immortality and mortality, between Babe Ruth against everyone else and Babe Ruth against the one man who could make him look ordinary, the Sultan of SWAT and the big train, the loudest man in baseball and the quietest, the man who broke every rule and the man who followed them all, the man who changed the game forever and the man who reminded him that some things are harder to change than others. They were both in the first Hall of Fame class. They both died of cancer within 2 years of each other. They both left behind records that will never be broken. They both came from nothing. Ruth from a reform school in Baltimore, Johnson from a Kansas farm and an Idaho telephone company. They both became the greatest at what they did. And they both left behind a rivalry that defined what baseball is at its highest level, the eternal battle between the man with the bat and the man with the ball. And every time they faced each other, across 113 at-bats and 17 years and one final exhibition at Yankee Stadium with the world at war, they gave baseball the greatest matchup the sport has ever seen, the greatest hitter, the greatest pitcher. Neither one did. Like and subscribe for more baseball documentaries. Until next time.